to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. I am a ninth grade English teacher and a USA Today bestselling author with over 30 published novels. And on this week, I'm excited to be talking to a middle grade and children's book writer, Caroline Starr Rose. We're going to be talking about her book, Miraculous, and then we'll kind of get, hopefully, a little bit of a preview of her upcoming book, which is how I found out about Caroline's writing to start with, and I'm excited for that one as well. But before we get too far into it, Caroline, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, and thank you so much, DelSheree, for having me on your show. I'm Caroline Starr Rose, and I am an author in Albuquerque. I'm a former middle school English and social studies teacher, though I also taught for a few years 4th and 5th grades. Upper elementary and middle school is my area of expertise and love. And I write middle grade novels, primarily historical fiction. Some of those books are verse novels, so stories told through poetry, and some are prose, like Miraculous. And then I also write picture books.
Such a range. They're all so specific in their techniques and how you approach them, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I did want to say, just like, my goodness, bless you for teaching middle school.
I loved them.
Oh my goodness. I'm glad that there are people out there who just mesh with that age group, because I'm like, man, ninth graders can be quite challenging. It's hard to imagine the less mature version of them.
I always felt if you can just really harness the weird, I guess is one way to put it, you can have so much fun with them. And I always came home with lots of stories. So.
Well, good. Well, before we jump into questions, I wanted to give you a chance to tell our listeners a little bit about Miraculous and the setup for the story.
So Miraculous is written for children who are 10 and up, and it is historical fiction set in the 1880s in the Midwest. And it's the story of a charlatan's boy. And so what I mean by that is a snake oil salesman has been traveling, for years, but with this young man in particular, Jack is his name, has been with him for several months as his assistant. His family has allowed him to work with Dr. Kingsbury because his sister took Dr. Kingsbury's tonic, which is supposed to cure any malady known to man or beast. And this tonic, sister of an illness. So the family in gratitude has sent Jack with the doctor to work for a time and to send money home back to the family. As Jack and Dr. Kingsbury come to a new town, something strange happens. There's an argument between an older teen who works for the doctor, and he leaves. And so Jack suddenly has to take on more responsibility than he's had in the past. And as he spends the next, few weeks, I believe, they're in town, in this new community, he starts for the first time to question the doctor's motives, the tonic itself, and what this means for his life and for his family. And the story is told through Jack's voice, and then, if I remember correctly, 4 other characters in the town.
And the town itself becomes really kind of its own character, because this town is very unique and it's got kind of some specific quirks to it that influence Jack's experience and just kind of how the story goes. So tell us a little bit about this interesting little town that you've created.
Yes, Oakdale is a town that has at its center an old oak tree that, according to legend, was planted by the town's founder centuries in the past. And he nurtured it from a small seed, brought it as a sapling, and planted it at this location. And there seems to be perhaps some magical elements to how the tree itself grew, because over the course of a winter, it fully developed, which, it should take an oak tree much longer to grow. And there are specific rules in this town about how to approach the tree. The tree has a wrought iron fence around it. It's not to be climbed or disrespected in any way. And there is a yearly ceremony that honors the town and the founder and this tree itself.
And you present all of these details through mostly the young character Jack's eyes, which I really loved about that, because sometimes even in children's literature, you still get the narrator's voice that kind of takes over and explains things. that sort of style, which works perfectly well in different stories. But I really loved that we get to see so much of this town as Jack is experiencing it and his impressions and his thoughts. And then we also get to see that through the other young character who's grown up there, who this is familiar to her, but she starts to see it a little bit differently as well. And we get those perspectives, which really I thought added a great layer to this story of what we grow up with and see as familiar versus someone else coming in that can kind of make us stop and be like, oh, maybe that is a little bit strange or different, or why do we do things certain ways, which I think is great for adults as well. A lot of adults need to question some of the things they've grown up with. But for this age group of readers that you're targeting, to give them that little nudge through these different perspectives of what are some things around you that maybe you need to look at and question and think about a little bit more.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the development of your characters, because they become friends in the story, but they come from quite different lives and perspectives. So what is your approach to creating and developing your characters, especially for young readers?
Oh, goodness. This is always such a difficult question because I don't know if I can tell you for sure this has never happened the same way twice. But I did know that I wanted two characters. So we have Cora, who is from Oakdale, and we have Jack, who's this outsider. And Cora comes from an established family. It was her relative who was the founder of the community. She's kind of in the well-known and respected family. And then we have Jack, who's this outsider, a boy who doesn't have much of a name or much money. And some people in the town actually question, what kind of a family would even send their child away to work with a man like Dr. Kingsbury. And so I wanted two children who are very different, yet are curious about each other and curious about the other's experiences, and then create a bond together where they are then exploring this idea of something is going on here that isn't quite right.
And I think you did that so well and really balanced the two characters in a way that they worked really well as, comparing and contrasting against each other in their experiences. But also it felt like you carried that on through some of their personalities and their ways that they interact with people. Cora's a little bit more adventurous and daring and willing to kind of go against things. But she's also come from an experience where she has that luxury, whereas Jack doesn't. He's got to do what he's told and stay on his toes and help his family and do all of those things, where it's kind of a reversal in some of the stereotypes that can go along with character creation. Was that something that when you set out and you were choosing which characters would be doing what in their lives and situations, how much of that do you plan ahead of time? Like, are you someone who does profiles and you get kind of like a really detailed sketch of your characters, or do you develop some of those traits as you're developing the story?
I would say both of those things go on. I would say with this book, I spent so much time laying groundwork that I wouldn't say necessarily directed. Well, I'll say this. As you can understand, I'm sure, as a writer, I wrote a lot that played no huge role in the story, but it was a big examination of Jack's character and why he is the way he was, feeling very responsible for his sister's health and her well-being. And I did want, I like, I've only written a few books with boys as the protagonists, and I've tried hard to make them nuanced, because I think sometimes we don't give boys a chance to not be bold and brash. I think sometimes that's how they're typically portrayed. And not everybody is the same. So I liked that a challenge for Jack is speaking in front of a group of people. So I just came back from an authors festival where I told students, I said, if you don't remember anything else about our talk today, I want you to remember that authors are mean and nasty people. And what I mean by that is you can't give your characters what they want, at least not straight away. And you need to make them face their weaknesses and their fears. And so the fact that Jack is not comfortable being in the limelight and then he's suddenly thrust into this position was one of those ways that I could place him in a position of discomfort, but ultimately pushes him toward growth.
I love that. I love what you told your students, your participants, and as well as just that approach to thinking about it that is so true and makes a lot of sense when you're looking at something critically and kind of breaking down, which I think is one of those first steps of beginning to create, is looking at what is done in the things that you enjoy and then kind of seeing, because I would imagine my kids aren't little anymore to be in this age group, so I don't get to read as much middle grade type fiction as I used to. But there were a lot of elements of not just Cora and Jack, but even some of the other children that interact with her sister, or sorry, not her sister, her cousin, and just seeing some of those personality traits that you see across the board in kids in those ages.
Yes.
And their reactions were very realistic. And it was like, I could see, my kids, nieces and nephews, and some of those different elements of just like, I think there's a lot for a wide variety of young readers to connect to because your characters are really multifaceted and they've got a lot of layers to them. They're not simplistic. And I think sometimes people think that writing for children, like you keep things simple so they can understand it, but that's not the case at all.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I really, in writing historical fiction, I really try to show that, the circumstance might be different, but those responses we have, those feelings we have are all very familiar.
Absolutely. I mean, we're still people no matter what the place or time period. We're still dealing with big emotions and difficult challenges and traumas and everything like that. It's good to see that over time, I guess in a way, it's good to see that we've always struggled as humans and we've made it through even some of the worst experiences.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
And I did want to ask you about the historical aspect. There's a lot of detail in the story, not overwhelmingly so, because you're very cognizant, it feels like, in your writing of who you're writing for. So you're not dumping information on 10-year-olds about the ins and outs of, life in this time period. But clearly you're very familiar with the time period and what life would be like at that time because it's portrayed very realistically. How do you approach your research and then balancing writing historical fiction for young readers and not overwhelming them with too much detail or history or facts or, whatever that might be?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I would say that I always start with a topic or a place that intrigues me as my starting point for the research. And what I love about research is it's as if I'm taking a class where I'm the only student and I get to set my coursework and how long it takes and the depth and the breadth. And it's just really energizing and interesting. And in this case, I started with the idea of a charlatan. I happened to be, I don't even remember when this was now, but gosh, roughly 10 years ago on a family trip. My family and I happened to be in St. Louis as part of our time away, and we happened to spend an afternoon at a museum. And I saw a sign that said, at 2:00 or something along those lines, there'll be a talk downstairs about snake oil salesmen, quacks, and charlatans. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I went down and attended this meeting. And as I was listening, I kept thinking, what kind of a person would choose to be so deceptive? Like, what would be the backstory? Who does this sort of thing? Who, is bold enough? And why would they behave this way? What would the end game be? So that was one side I was thinking about. And then the other side was, and who responds to somebody who is offering some medical marvel? What position would you be in to respond positively? You must be perhaps desperate with an illness, or perhaps, well, there are any number of things. And I was really interested to do this research because I found P.T. Barnum was one of the kind of the founder of the snake oil movement, even though he didn't himself sell snake oil, but really kind of his technique techniques are what were used in this movement. And much of our advertising today is based on techniques used at this time in the mid to late 1800s by these snake oil salesmen. One of these ideas is to show people that they have a need. They might not even be aware of this need. Maybe it's something like bad breath. So show them the need and then provide them the cure. So once they are aware, and usually if it's something that you can show a person that is shameful or embarrassing, or you can appeal to their pride or their sense of lack, maybe they're not smart enough or beautiful enough or any of those sorts of things, and then convince them that you have an answer for them, people are willing to respond. And I think what's really interesting is, as I was doing this research and thinking of this book, and the Dr. Kingsbury character in particular, and this tonic that he creates that he claims can do anything in the world, I thought a lot about how this would be received by young readers. They would think, oh my goodness, this is over the top, and I would never fall for something like that. But I encourage kids to think about all the ways today, whether it's a person with a really strong dynamic personality that we can all get behind because of their just ability to draw a crowd. That's kind of like a snake oil salesman, or could be in the wrong hands. Or it's a product that we see on TV that can do everything. And I encourage them to think about those things in our lives where we are anxious or feel embarrassed by, and the ways that products even today really speak to those places in our lives where we want a solution. And we're not, in other words, we're not as sophisticated as we sometimes behave, because we fall for this sort of thing too. Maybe somebody's not coming through town with a wagon selling their wares, but it is pretty easy to fall for products that we think will solve our problems.
Oh, absolutely. I love that you brought that up, because that was a lot of the kind of sidetracks that my mind went through while reading this, of like, oh, if they only had like better communication back then, like this guy wouldn't have been able to do that. And then I'm like, well, we've got pretty good communication now, and this still happens all the time. Like, it just
Yeah.
takes different forms. I think that
Yes.
there's always these people out there in society who want to use whatever talents they have for purposes that are not very nice. And
Yeah.
it's unfortunate that that is just a part of society. But, yeah, this type of thing in different forms happens every day all over the place. And it's one of those things that I think most of us are like, oh, I'd never fall for something like that. But they get really, really tricky sometimes.
Yeah, I was thinking even most recently, I mean, this book published in 2022, and I feel like since then, kind of the iteration of the day is the self-made social media expert that, people turn to because this person has put themselves in a position of popularity, essentially, where they have a lot of people listening, and their opinion or their knowledge, and I use that loosely, becomes a real authority in a lot of lives when they oftentimes don't have a lot of authority backing the claims that they're making. Something to be aware of, the products and the people. It's something to be
Absolutely.
aware of.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because we're getting ready to start our argumentative unit. And so I'm, going through and doing my lesson plans and getting to logical fallacies and lining out which ones we're going to focus on. And I was kind of thinking back to last year and some of the ones that my students struggled with. And the one where it's like, okay, just because it's a celebrity saying it, does that mean it's true? And a lot of them are like, yeah, you can trust them. You can trust the person on TikTok. Of course, LeBron James knows what shoes are best. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
guys.
that's why a celebrity endorsement is gold.
Very effective, yes. But
Yes.
it's like, okay, guys, we need to stop. We need to think a little bit more critically sometimes.
Yes.
It's not just young people. It's
Yeah,
adults as
you're
well. We
right.
get tricked by stuff
You're right.
too. And I like that this book introduces those ideas of some really, complex problems that a lot of adults have a hard time dealing with. But you were able to put a lot of these issues of, not only the trickery going on, but how Cora deals with her family in the town and the sense of, being an outcast and not welcome. These are a lot of hard things that people face at all ages, but it's introduced here in a way that I think is really digestible for young readers to help them think about ways that they might approach a situation, or if they see someone in their class or whatever who's being treated unkindly, what can they do to help? And
Hmm.
it's done in such a gentle way that it doesn't feel like, an Aesop fable of like, and the moral of the story is. It's presented in a very natural, enjoyable way that I think this age group will really enjoy this story a lot.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Gosh, we're already starting to approach the time to wrap up. But before we do that, the other thing that I wanted to ask you about with this one does have to do with kind of I don't want to say like magical element because it's not, but the way you introduce the snake oil part of it, of
Hmm.
how convincing he is. And there seems to be this evidence that supports what he's doing. That's tricky. That's really hard.
Yes.
the
Yes, it
the
is.
project I'm working on now, I'm constantly going back like, is this too obvious? Is it not? I need to have someone else look at this and read it because I can't tell anymore. So how do you work with that, with giving out just enough and keeping that suspense and that sense of wonderment, especially for young readers, because they're very discerning and they're quick to call out an author on, well, that doesn't make sense or that's dumb or, things like that. So, how do
Yeah.
you approach that and how did you maintain that so well
Oh,
to
wow.
keep them intrigued?
I don't know. I didn't. I'm glad to hear that worked. I guess it often comes back for me to staying in the mind of the character that's driving the scene. Jack is the main character, but we do have these secondary characters that also narrate their chapters. And I wanted the story to unfold. We sometimes, as the reader, get a little ahead of Jack with connecting dots as to something is not coming together here in the way that Jack believes. But we don't know everything. You want to have a balance of not, well, it's like you said, I'm not sure how I did this. You don't want the character to be left looking like a fool, but you don't want to move so quickly that it's not interesting or suspenseful or believable for the reader. So I think for me, if I can stay with the character and how they are responding in the moment to the situation, and then how those responses progress as more of information are revealed, that seems to be the best way to craft a story. But I can hear as I'm saying this, that doesn't really, what does that mean exactly? I guess what I'm saying is a lot of this is trial and error, and there's an element of magic and mystery even in the drafting process, because I don't know if I can necessarily always explain it. And I'm incredibly grateful for an editor who has a strong, strong sense of story and who can guide me back to what the characters are doing when I lose my way.
I think that's a wonderful answer. It's very true. I think we don't always, set out like, okay, I've got this plan. Here we go. I'm going to carry it out in step A, B, and C.
Yes,
And it's successful. So much of writing is an exploration of our characters, our ideas, our settings, our intentions that sometimes go, completely somewhere else than what we started out with. But I
right.
love what you mentioned of just, staying with the characters, being in the story, working with what is working. And I'm glad to hear also that you have a wonderful editor because that's really hard to find sometimes.
I call her my story whisperer. She really understands. And there are times almost with every book where I will be approaching a spot where I think I have no idea what to do or how to fix this particular area now that she's pointed out that it is not working. And I'll send her an email saying, okay, I'm getting near that spot. Can we have a conversation? So, she talks to me along the way as well. So that's been really beneficial.
Oh, that's really nice. And I think that's something for newer writers who maybe aren't in a place where they've, got an established editor or, contracts and things like that. Finding that critique partner who can do something similar
Yes,
is so valuable and also hard
agreed.
to find. But that's something, I think encouraging young readers to find that person who can constructively read and offer feedback. That's such a great way to learn.
I agree. I have a critique group I've been meeting with for at least 10 years now, and they just have taught me so much about what it means to be a writer and how to improve my work and how to maintain a career, because that's not always easy.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so many moving parts to it. It's nice
Yes.
to have that support. Well, and we are getting close to time to wrapping up, and I didn't want to forget, so I have it up on my other screen to talk about The Burning Season, which is your upcoming book that will come out next year. And I actually, a mutual friend posted about this. I think they were doing the cover reveal or something. I can't remember now. But I
Yes.
was instantly intrigued by the cover and was like, hey, connect me. I really want to hear more about this. So give us a little bit, whatever you're able to share at this point, of, when, and maybe a brief overview of what The Burning Season is about so people can look forward to it.
Yes, I'm so excited. And I can say that for every new book, my first feeling is I'm so excited about this one, which is exactly as it should be. But The Burning Season is my first return, or is my return to verse novel. I haven't published a verse novel in about 10 years. It will be 10 years exactly when this comes out next May. And again, verse novel is a story told through poetry, which is not especially familiar for a lot of adults, but is a technique that has become more and more common in children's literature. And it's a story, it's my first book located in New Mexico, which is so thrilling for me to get to share our wonderful state with others. It's set in the Gila Wilderness in a fire tower during fire season. And it's the story of a girl named Opal who's just turned 12, and she starting on her 12th birthday, begins training to be a fire lookout. Now, she won't, of course, take the job immediately. She'll need to be an adult for that. But she will be the fourth generation woman in her family to serve as a lookout in the Gila Wilderness. But Opal has a secret. She's afraid of fire. And again, because authors need to be mean and nasty, that means that she needs to face fire in some way in the course of the story. And it was a delight to write. It was so fascinating to dig into fire management, the history of fire management. We had, as I was drafting, of course, we had 2022 with the two biggest wildfires in New Mexico history were taking place. And it just has been, this feels like a book for the times. And it feels like a book that I hope any sort of a kid who loves adventure will be interested in, because it is a survival story as well.
I definitely think it will intrigue a lot of readers. Me as an adult reader, I'm really looking forward to reading it as well.
Thank you.
So yeah, we will definitely stay in touch, and we'll have you back on as we're getting closer to the burning season coming out. But where can people find you and stay up to date on your writing and everything that you're doing?
Yes, I am I'm no longer on social media, which actually is delightful.
I
That is
bet.
delightful. But you can find me at my website, CarolineStarrRose.com, and Starr has two R's. So CarolineStarrRose.com.
Awesome. Well, Caroline, thank you so much. This has been so much fun talking to you, and I really enjoyed the book, and I hope people take a minute to check it out and pick it up, whether of any ages, because it was a really delightful read as an adult, and if my kids were still little, I would sit down and read it with them as well.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you so much for the time to talk today.